Our program will begin shortly. For those of you watching online, our program will begin shortly. Thank you.
items to add. This one. I'm going to test them out for you.
Sure, thanks. I need water, so I was worried over there.
So there's this one.
Oh, that's better because I can actually see.
Or the lower one.
This one's good.
This one's good?
Yeah, so I can look at my notes if I get.
Okay, you don't have to speak right into the mic. Usually, you'll see the way I do it. It's not the best in the world, the sound system, but we'll do. Come on in and take a seat. We're going to get started in just a moment. Sorry, we're running late. Do you have to be somewhere immediately afterwards? Okay. When I'm done, I'm going to dim the spots. Yeah. Actually, let me just. Okay. Yeah, they dimmed them. They're a little better. All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. So before we formally begin, I just want to acknowledge Kerry Fox, who I don't know if he is in this space right now, but Kerry, who is part of our programming committee, who arranges each year this important lecture and so many other programs, and arranged for Rachel Lerman to be here. So Kerry, thank you. And Kerry, who unfortunately had a little bit of a bike accident, so don't touch his shoulders because he is not doing great, but thank God he is here in as best condition as he can. Also, for those of you that had an opportunity to get a bite to eat this morning, before our talk, I want to thank Al Alfaso, Bert Turtz, Meredith Fox, Roger Lemberg, Mort Rabinovich, and Ziggy Boxer for putting together that wonderful breakfast. And of course, I want to thank all of you for being here for our 4th annual Lisa Schwartz-Tudson Memorial Lecture. When Lisa died, sadly way too young, taken before she lived the fullness of her years, her beloved parents, Marion and Peter, came to me with the desire to do something here at the synagogue to honor Lisa's memory. Why at the synagogue of all places? I believe for 2 reasons. First, Lisa was a fierce advocate for justice who dedicated her professional life to righting through law the wrongs and injustices of our world, who cared deeply for those less fortunate, who strove always in her life to live with moral rectitude, guided by the Torah values of tzedek and mishpat. Her Jewish faith guided Lisa in both her professional world and in her personal life. Jewish traditions writ large in the ways she conducted herself. And second, because the synagogue was to Lisa community and family. Here is where she could live out the values of her faith with others who shared a common language and a way of acting with avodat HaKodesh, holy service to our world, where integrity and kindness, decency and dependability are cherished, where she could wholly be herself and bring her goodness to bear on the shaping of our Kihila Kedoshah, where she could raise her family, husband Michael, daughters Sarah and Hannah, and now to add Michael and Maddie, in a warm, loving, embracing environment, and by extension, her brother Mark as well. So what better way to honor her memory than bring to this community individuals who act in a world likewise, whose commitment to justice as formed through our rich heritage, whose passion for lifting up the unfortunate and mitigating the pain that innocents suffer through prejudice, inequality, or discrimination can be role models for the rest of us. To kick off this lecture series, we had the honor of welcoming Berkeley Law Dean Erwin Chemerinsky. Then following, we invited UCLA Law Professor Eugene Volokh to speak, and last year we had the honor of learning from Loyola Law School Professor Laurie Levinson. This year we are privileged once again to invite an individual of renown whose work places her at the core of the fight against one of the oldest scourges that has plagued humanity, that of anti-Semitism. Regardless of its form, the ability to morph or adapt itself like other viruses in the political and cultural fashions of the day, anti-Semitism is simply a hatred of Jews and of the values we espouse to the world. Whether taken in the form of anti-Zionism as it is expressed today, or that Jews are communists or capitalists, controlling the left or the right, the banks or the media, there is ample reason to hate Jews simply because we are Jews. And that is why we need organizations such as the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, and why we absolutely need individuals like L. Rachel Lerman, General Counsel for the Brandeis Center, who serves as the center's vice chair and is leading the fight against anti-Semitism on college campuses today and in K-12 schools. Ms. Lerman earned her BA from Yale and her JD from Berkeley Law. At the outset of her legal career, she clerked for the late Honorable T.J. Nelson of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. She was a partner in the appellate practice group of Akin Gum and co-chaired the National Appellate Practice Group at Barnes and Thornburg. During her years in private practice, she litigated federal and state appeals and engaged in pro bono work on behalf of asylum applicants, prisoners, and private citizens, winning recognition from the ACLU and Public Counsel. Today, her fight is our fight. Her holy work is her commitment to fighting this ancient menace that continues to harm not just Jews around the world, but all of humanity. We are honored to welcome Rachel Lerner to our community.
Thank you so much, Rabbi, and thank you for all being here on a Sunday and for an excellent breakfast. I hope this is working. Do I have it in the right place? Okay, good. So as the rabbi mentioned, I work for the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, which is a mouthful, so I will call it the Brandeis Center. And the Brandeis Center is mainly, until recently, an East Coast-based organization. Focused when I joined 3.5 years ago, there was a DC office, and most of us were working remotely because of COVID. Now we have a New York office, and I'm happy to say an LA office, which I head, which is in the Howard Hughes area near where I live. So let me tell you a little bit about the Brandeis Center in case you haven't already read every page of our website. 12 years ago, Ken Marcus, who is a classmate of mine at Berkeley Law School, told me he was organizing a new group and would I be on his board of directors. And I said, well, tell me what the group does. And he said, well, we're going to use the civil rights laws to protect Jews in America. And I grew up with family that was big in the civil rights movement in the 60s, and honestly, it had never occurred to me that we should be using the civil rights laws to help ourselves. And Ken, this is 12 years ago, he said, you'll see, we need it. Part of Ken's experience was working at the head of the Office for Civil Rights in the Department of Education. First time he headed the office was during George W. Bush's administration, and the first time, the beginning of what has now become the Marcus Doctrine was right after 9/11. And Sikh and Muslim kids were getting beaten up on college campuses. And the Office for Civil Rights said, okay, we have Title VI. Title VI says that any entity that receives federal funding, and that would be just about every university and college in America, has a commitment to prevent bias, harassment, discrimination against people on the basis of color, race, or national origin. It doesn't say religion. There's a long and complicated history to that, involving actually an animus toward Christianity, but that's what it says, color, race, national origin. And when you first hear national origin, you think, well, people who came from another country. Okay, I came from Canada, so I could say, you know, if someone beat me up for being a Canadian, well, that's on the basis of my national origin. I've never been too worried about that. So after 9/11, they thought, well, Sikhs and Muslims, what if they've been here for generations? Aren't they just religious groups? And Ken said, well, no, they're more than religious groups. They're like the Jews. They have a people. They have an ethnicity. They have their national origin, whether they were born here or not, is, you know, in India or in places where, you know, Muslims have historically been. So the Marcus Doctrine says that groups like Muslims, Sikhs, and Jews are protected under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, even though it just says race, color, national origin. So we're not protected. Jewish students aren't protected because of their religion, because of their Sabbath observance or any other religious element. We're protected as a people. And that's an idea that has taken some time and is still taking time to explain to others. Ken was also head of the Office for Civil Rights during the first Trump administration. And I think some of you are familiar with an executive order that passed then and is still in effect that says Title VI absolutely protects Jewish students. And when we are looking at conduct that violates Title VI, we take into account what is called the IRA definition. It's an International Holocaust Remembrance Act definition of Judaism that explains, that has examples of what anti-Semitic rhetoric might be, and it includes demonizing Israel, delegitimizing Israel, using a double standard for the land of Israel, what Nathan Sharansky used to call the 3 Ds. I think it's easier to remember if you just think about the 3 Ds rather than the 12 examples. And a lot of people have gotten kind of worried about this definition because they think it means that you'll be punished if you use this kind of rhetoric. But that's not the case. The idea is to understand when conduct, harassment, discrimination is anti-Semitic, when it's not based on desecrating the Sabbath or stopping someone's Jewish ritual. It's based on the notion, and I think most Jews in America share this. I've heard it's as high as 96%, maybe 80%. Different polls come up with different figures, but most Jews feel inherently in their heart, in their kishkas, that they have a tie to the land of Israel. They understand that Judaism was born in the land of Israel. They understand that the temple was created in the land of Israel and destroyed and recreated. They understand that for generations, for thousands of years, we've said next year in Jerusalem, at the end of the Passover Seder, we feel like we are tied to that land. Not necessarily to any particular government in what has become the state of Israel. I think Jews probably criticize Netanyahu more than anybody else. But we do feel that Israel is our national origin, kind of writ large. So that's still in effect. It was still in effect during the Biden administration. And it's been used by the Office for Civil Rights in a number of cases. We brought a case against the University of Vermont, and by case I mean we filed a complaint with the agency several years ago, and the basis of the complaint was that quote-unquote Zionists could not join certain school clubs. And TAs in the classroom were suggesting they might flunk all Zionists. So this is the kind of conduct that we talked about in our complaint, and the Office for Civil Rights agreed with us that these were violations of Title VI, and it entered into a settlement agreement with the university, and we understand that things are actually a lot better on campus now as a result. And we use that example going forward at other schools to try to educate people to understand that being Jewish is not just being observant. Some Jews aren't observant. It's the sense of peoplehood that we have with the land of Israel. I'd like to entertain questions as I go, because as my husband, who's kindly here in the first row, has told me many times, well, you kind of glossed over Title VI and no one's ever even heard of it. So I had never heard of it before I joined the Brandeis Center, I'll be honest with you. So if you do have questions as we go, please interrupt me. Be happy to try to answer them. Yes?
Thank you for your hard work with Fessenbaum and other folks throughout the country and internationally for the attention you brought to this very important issue that certainly goes far beyond the title of today's lecture suggests, university. Are you aware of anything involving other institutions like LAUSD and some of the... That's okay. Thank you, though.
Stand up, thank you.
Are you aware, and are you perhaps working would we help with things involving LAUSD, NY Public Schools, Massachusetts as well, New Orleans? It's certainly not only limited to this country, but it seems to be something that's infected for many, many years throughout multiple communities globally. And how can we help?
That's a great transition into my next section, which I was, when I got to the Brandeis Center 3.5 years ago, I was the only person in Los Angeles, so all of the calls involving California, from the JCRC in the Bay Area to teachers in LA, came to me. And I started to become aware in a way that I never had been, even though I had 2 kids go through LAUSD, of the depth of the problem of what's being taught in the schools and how Jewish kids are being targeted in many schools. The biggest problem that seemed to be these ethnic studies curricula. I have nothing against ethnic studies. I think it's, there's a lot of good to be said for what it is meant to be. But a lot of schools were and are using ethnic studies as a platform for anti-Semitic and anti-Israel teaching. Now, when they first came to me, the parents were complaining because they couldn't see the curriculum. And that's a problem, not only because parents should be able to see the curriculum, but because as a lawyer, there's not much I can do without evidence. So it wasn't until the summer of 2023 that someone in Orange County called and said, take a look at these courses they're teaching in Santa Ana. And there was plenty to be upset about. At least 3 of the ethnic studies courses were just chock full of really biased, and I'll call it propaganda. It was really one-sided, untrue propaganda against Israelis and the land of Israel, the state of Israel. And part of the problem was that these schools had very few Jewish students, because it's a mostly Hispanic area, and nobody really knew how this happened. They said to me, we watch, we keep an eye on things here, and all of a sudden we see these curricula that no one's ever seen before that are now going to be taught in the schools. And so I engaged with another lawyer who's now at the Brandeis Center, Marcy Miller, who had expertise in education law, and in the Brown Act, which I'll explain in a second. So we took a look at these courses, and we took a look at the Brown Act, which is our open meeting law, which very strong open meeting law in California. It's not always observed. And in this case, the school district had deliberately violated, we think, the open meeting laws by never letting anyone see what was going to be in these courses until they were approved. So, we were working with a bunch of Jewish groups in the Orange County area. We started by writing to the school district saying, okay, you can't teach this stuff, it's unlawful, here's why, let's talk. They never got back to us. So Marcy suggested, let's just go with the Brown Act, see what happens, because they can't ignore a Brown Act letter. That's in fact how you initiate litigation under the open meeting laws. You write a letter, say, hey, I think you're violating these. They have to write back. Of course, they wrote back saying everything's fine, nothing's going wrong. And we went to court in Orange County, brought kind of a writ, which is not important really what that is, but saying, the Brown Act has been violated, here's how, and we want injunctive relief. And that means we want everything that they've done unlawfully to be done over. So they'd have to retract all the courses and start over. After that, we were granted a hearing date, I think not until November. So we started doing discovery. And I'll say after Marcy and I started this lawsuit, AJC, ADL, and Stand With Us kind of joined in, and a firm called Covington and Burling offered to work with us pro bono, kind of a big deal firm. So that was one of the happy results of the media attention that was drawn to this. So they said, let's do discovery. We can put off the hearing date and do discovery, and let's see what we find. And what we found was, well, it was pretty awful, pretty amazing stuff, basically making it very clear that the committee that did these ethnic studies courses included board members, which is a little weird, and these two board members were dead set on including this anti-Israel information in these courses, and they were dead set on working under the radar, those are their words, to make sure that the Jewish community knew nothing about it. None of the community knew anything about it. We have emails saying that they had a Jewish member of the committee. How are we going to have a meeting about this? Well, let's just do it on Passover. Great idea. They would talk about, and during such meetings, they would talk about how to handle the Jewish question. When the Jewish Federation tried to engage with them, they would warn one another that the Zionists were in the building. So we uncovered an awful lot of that kind of ugly stuff. And we also had evidence that they hadn't followed the rules of the Brown Act or the ethnic studies laws, which also require 2 public hearings before you can pass a curriculum. Went to court in December. The court made pretty clear that it was on our side, but it really wanted the parties to settle. And around that time, because of the publicity, the 2 board members, actually, one of them resigned under pressure, and the other one was voted out. So that was already a big step, getting those 2 people out of the picture. There were still a few bad actors in there. But after the court hearing, the district said, maybe we should think about settling. Never wanted to settle before. So we drafted up a settlement sheet that was like kind of a wish list, like, all right, do all these things and we'll settle with you. And we got almost every one of them. It's amazing. You don't get that. I mean, it's kind of, you go in, you're negotiating. Well, we want all these things. Well, we don't, But we got almost everything. And among the things we got, and some of this was in newspapers last week that some of you may have read, they took the anti-Semitic content out of these courses. They agreed that the courses had to be revised and go through the proper Brown Act process, and that the Jewish groups and other Jewish groups had a right to see what was going on and be involved in the process. They did something else that sounds a little like so what, but it's actually a big deal. Most schools in California have a controversial issues rule. If you're going to teach a controversial issue, there's 12 things you have to do. And what they boil down to is you have to show both sides. It has to be a balanced presentation. It has to be based on fact, not propaganda. And no teacher is allowed to try to indoctrinate students with political, religious, or other kinds of beliefs. And we brought this up before. The kinds of answers we got were, well, this isn't a controversial issue. Everyone knows Israel is a genocidal actor. Okay, great. So they had to acknowledge that this was a controversial issue, and they have to follow the controversial issue rules. And we hope very much that this will help us in other districts. We hope that other districts will take note and that we can persuade all of the many districts in California, I think there's 1,200, not all of them problematic, but many of them, to treat this as a controversial issue. Yeah, I see a question. Hi. Oh, hi, good to see you.
Curriculum issues.
That's right.
So I report to them incidents rather than curriculum-related issues, and those are the harder ones to deal with. And I think, well, now I find out from you that you have a way of dealing with them, but I think that has to be done at a higher level, Department of Education.
We've brought many OCR complaints
Okay,
to the Department of Education.
okay. But
High
it's-
schools, elementary schools, as well as colleges. And as you say, they won't do curriculum. They've said that outright, although I think that may be changing now. But in the past, they were dead set against anything curricular, and we had to kind of reframe it as something else. But
it's
we
good to know
focused
that
on
you-
things like bullying. Yeah.
So it's good to know that you and your organization can deal with those type of situations. And I do want to deal with directly with the Department of Education. And Leo Terrell, I'm sure that you've heard that he was assigned to head a group dealing with anti-Semitism. I would like to get in touch with these organizations directly. Maybe you can help us with those situations.
Sure. See another question? Yes?
I am so pleased to hear I don't think I need this, what's being done, but the reality and the thing that bothers me as a former educator is it's one thing to put everything in line, but the direct contact with the students are the teachers.
That's right.
And who is retraining them and who is monitoring them? And are the administrators kind of looking the other way? Because I was an administrator, and a lot of times what happens, you really have to monitor. And I'm not talking about anti-Semitism, but making sure that two sides are presented and a teacher doesn't go over the line.
That's right.
So how are you monitoring the teachers?
Well, that's always an issue with, with a settlement agreement. One of the parts of the settlement agreement is they can no longer use, I think it's called CHITO, X-I-T-O, which is a very anti-Semitic group that was doing all their teacher training. So maybe they'll find another anti-Semitic group, but this one is out. And of course, we're going to keep a close eye on things. And we really depend on people who are in the classroom, children, parents, not in the classroom, but who talk to their children, teachers. And this is really tricky because, like I said, I had 2 kids that went to LAUSD, never heard a peep out of them about this. And only now, my son is in his 30s, works for Tikva Fund, and now he tells me what they were teaching him, It's like, Sam, why didn't you tell me then? Well, I thought you'd go in and make a fuss and embarrass me. So, yeah, probably all of you have your own Sams, and what can you do? But there have been a few parents whose kids have talked to them, and in Berkeley Unified School District, for example, we uncovered a whole nest of horrible stuff, initially because a kid talked to his mom. And we did bring an OCR complaint against Berkeley Unified.
Yeah.
There.
Could you elaborate a little on the Brown
Act?
The Brown Act, number 1. Number 2, the unions. There's real problems with the unions, and how do you get to them?
Okay, the Brown Act is just a series of laws that say that taxpayer money has to be used in a way that's open to the public. And you have to have, in schools, school boards have to have meetings where they discuss and tell the parents and the community this is what we're planning to do, and get public feedback. And that's what they didn't do. And this is happening a lot all over California, probably all over the US, where school districts don't want the parents to know what's going on. Parents have the right to see what their kids are being taught, but school after school just refuses to provide that information. We do FOIA requests all the time. We rarely really get much in the way of anything. Public Records Act requests, rarely get anything. I'll get to you in a second. The union issue is something I'm gonna save for last, because that's like our new horizon for action. Oh, sorry.
Hi. So this case that you're referring to was brought to you by a parent or somebody. Do you use technology? Obviously, there's so many districts out there, not just in California, throughout the country. Do you use technology to weed out these bad actors? Because it's not humanly possible to actually know about all these bad actors. So do you use technology to weed out? Because today you have AI and all kinds of other technological tools to find these people in these areas. And
I'll
then
tell you how we find people. At college, we work really closely with Jewish on Campus and ICC and other groups that have boots on the ground, so to speak, at the colleges, and they tell students to call us. We set up, on October 7th, our phones were just ringing off the hook, and we were still a pretty small group, and we've been super busy up till then, and now it was just insanity. We simply couldn't keep up with the number of calls, so we established 2 call lines with the help of ADL and Hillel in one case, and with the help of Stand With Us and ADL in the other. So we still have these 2 helplines. One is for college, one is for K-12, that parents can call, and we'll put a lawyer in touch with them to get their story, and we will provide legal advice if there is a legal scenario there. If there isn't, we'll explain to them why there isn't and give them other resources. And I should have a whiteboard or something, but I can provide that information to you guys if you want it. So that's one way we've been handling it, but we also have a very close relationships with the JCRCs and groups like that call us when they hear things from parents. So we managed to stay on top of a lot. We just opened up our call line from California to include New York and Massachusetts. We probably should do some more states, but right now those are the states that we're focusing on, and we have plenty of work to do in California, New York, and Massachusetts. I think there was someone over here that.
Quick question, and that relates to what you brought up about individuals who indoctrinate their own students. They're not. Well, they talk to their students representing their bias. The question is, from a legal standpoint, assuming that somebody like that is tenured, can they be thrown out based
Not
on
easily.
such incidents?
Not easily. In the high schools and elementary schools, the districts actually have more power because the free speech rules are completely different. So a district can, if it wanted, crack down on teachers using their position to indoctrinate kids, and they do crack down when it comes to someone putting a cross on the wall or somebody saying things that are offensive to LGBTQ. They do crack down, and they can, because teachers don't have free speech in the classroom. They're government actors. They're speaking for the government.
There is, for example,
In elementary school and high school.
I
But
filed
even though they could crack down, we haven't seen them willing to do so. That's for a variety of reasons. Maybe they sympathize with the teachers. Maybe they're afraid of the unions. Maybe they just don't want the extra hassle.
Can that be addressed in court? For example, I filed one complaint against Professor Massad. I believe he's in NYU, who is just a pure anti-Semite. He has all these publications on the subject, teaching classes about Zionism and what can we do about it, and so on and so forth.
Professors have what's called academic freedom as well as free speech rights. And unless a university, obviously if this professor were talking about any other group, there would probably be an outcry and they might be removed. But we don't get the same situation when it's anti-Semitism, and there really, as a legal matter, it's free speech. It's free speech, and not much we can do about it. We have to wait for conduct. And this is what we try to explain to parents and students who call us. Here's what you need to be looking for. You need to be looking for something that isn't just speech. Are you being, as a practical matter, kept out of the library? Are there student groups that won't accept you because you're Jewish or Zionist? Has your teacher suggested that your grade might be lowered if you don't toe the line in his or her class? Are there TAs, and there are a lot of TAs, going online and saying, some pretty terrible things about what they'd like to do to the Zionists in their classroom? Okay, that's free speech, but it crosses the line. And so we've had we don't go after speech alone, in part because we honor the First Amendment, in part because we know that it's a dead end in court.
Counselor, on that issue of alternate remedies, is it possible to have civil lawsuits not based on free speech against some of these public actors, but intentional infliction of emotional stress, negligent infliction of emotional distress, harassment, toxic work environment for other colleagues, and also like for the instance at Cooper Union, which is where I used to live in New York, obviously a terrible, terrible situation that was repeated. Also next to, Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law, where I went, there was a terrible incident right next door at Parsons, at the new school. Lori Levinson from here, I just heard, was a lecturer here before I moved here. She was my old professor.
And there's Columbia, too,
And there's
which is
Columbia.
a lovely school in New York.
Right. So isn't it possible, again, I understand the free speech argument, but their hate speech is not really protected, and there's time, place, and manner.
Hate speech is protected.
Not when it incites, I thought not when it incites violence.
Incitement, not when it incites violence. That's really hard to prove.
Understood.
Really hard to prove. It's frustrating, and we have to find ways to deal with the very real effects that the speech is having on students and in the classroom. And emotional distress is not enough. So we need to show exclusion, or we need to show either that there's a hostile environment that's so intense that the person can't get the educational opportunities that anyone else can get. That's one thing we can do. So that's harassment. We have discrimination. You're treating different groups differently. We can go after that. So we do use the speech in our lawsuits just to paint a picture of what the environment is like, but we don't bring claims that are just based on speech. And you're right, you mentioned time, manner, place rules. Those are school rules that should be followed, that says that, you can't have noise over a certain level at your protest. You can't protest in a way that interferes with people going to class. And we're finding that the schools won't enforce them when it comes to anti-Semitism. It is a Title VI violation, and we do bring OCR complaints based on that. We're also bringing more and more cases in court. That's part of the reason we're growing, is that there are times you need to go to state or federal court, as we did in the Santa Ana case, to get the kind of results you want. The one from 2 days ago? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we're looking at it very closely, and of course, there will be court challenges. So we need to see, kind of, executive orders are always subject to court challenge, and they've become more and more popular in the, certainly during the Obama years, we saw plenty, and during the Biden years and the Trump years. People get tired of Congress not doing anything, and the executive will issue these orders that sometimes get knocked out in court and sometimes don't. So we're hoping that, that these orders will actually have some impact. And we're trying to use them as best we can. Yeah?
A few moments ago, you spoke about the fact that parents have the right to know what's being taught to their children in schools, but nonetheless, the schools aren't making that information open to the parents. That was like a gut punch to me. And how are the schools justifying not keeping what the curriculum is, or topics being taught, or whatever those things may be, not open to the parents of the children in their class, in the public school system, certainly?
Well, parents go in, they say, I'd like to see what's being taught in my kid's history class, and they're told, you can't. You don't have access to that. If, they use bring in a lawyer and say, well, you do have the rights in California to see this material. They'll say, well, if you come in on the third Wednesday of every month between these hours, and of course most parents work, but even if you do go in, they may charge you a lot they'll say you can't copy anything. Well, that's not true. You can make copies. And there's legal authority for this, but you have to piece together a lot of statutes to get there. They just say, they'll say it's privacy, or they'll say, they'll come up with something. It's not, no. They'll just stonewall you. And this is true all over the country. There have been people trying to, say that this kind of material should be available online for parents, but the unions are really against that, and those laws don't pass.
A lot of what you're addressing is the global component of it. There's a practical component too. How far can your organization go, or what kind of reach does a parent have, for example, against a teacher who targets a kid, messes with their grades,
That's conduct.
screws their college chance, or their, the star student, straight A, but let's get that Jew and give them the C, or whatever it is that screws them.
We can go to the Office for Civil Rights, and we can go to court.
You representing
Yeah,
directly,
we do.
or parent?
Well, here's what we do. A lot of times, parents don't want to be the plaintiff. Students don't want to be the plaintiff. People don't want their child to be hurt because they're a plaintiff. So we have a membership organization called JAIF, and we're changing what it stands for, because now it says Jewish Americans, and we're dealing with Israelis too, for fairness in education. So people can join that group and not be named. And then for what's called standing purposes, we can say 3 or 5 or 12 members of our organization, are parents with students in this school. And we can describe what has happened without naming names. Now, at some point during the discovery process, the lawyers may want access, they may want to talk to these people, but it does keep their name out of the press. So that's how we handle that. Some people really want to be plaintiffs. I have a parent in Berkeley who's just right out front, talks to all the newspapers, happy for us to use her name, real fighter. But I can understand why the majority of parents, don't want to go there.
Hi, maybe it's just me, and I'll probably be sleeping on the couch tonight, but all these questions.
Taking this away.
Yeah, don't take it away. I personally, I'm losing track of your discussion because of all all these questions coming in. So maybe it's just me, but
Oh, there's always a trade-off.
there's a trade-off, and I'm.
So let me just say a little more. This is that case I just talked about. That was the beginning of our K-12 initiative, which I'm really, really passionate about. In part because when I started at the Brandeis Center, my son was in graduate school and he was a TA, and he said, "Mom, it's too late when they get to college. They've already been indoctrinated. They've been indoctrinated since kindergarten, and that's what you have to look at." And that's what I set out to look at. And yes, that's what we're uncovering. In fact, there's a woman in Israel who has an American who's been studying textbooks for decades, and she said this started in the 70s. Nobody knew. This started in the 70s, this indoctrination. And so we're looking at, well, what are the ways that we can use the law to fight this? We're trying to think creatively. We're looking at the publishing companies. We're looking at the unions. We're looking at what we can do with the Department of Education, what we can do in court. you have to be really careful when you go to court, because where are you bringing this case, and what result are you likely to get? The last thing in the world you want to do is make bad law. Last thing in the world. So we don't want to be running to the Ninth Circuit or the Northern District of California with some of our cases, because we could get a judge that ends up ruling in a way that creates terrible law. And we have colleagues who are nevertheless doing it, and we're trying to collaborate more with all the different groups to try to prevent this from happening. There was a bad LAUSD decision not long ago. This is the kind of stuff that really worries us. But we also think, okay, if we could just get something in the Fifth Circuit, we'd probably have a good shot. Of course, it's harder to find things there because, you know, the Texas schools don't have as many problems as we do. And I'm sorry that I'm putting this gentleman to sleep, but yeah.
Where is the money coming from? Earlier, you mentioned a group in particular that was teaching this anti-Semitism to the teachers. And it seems to me that we're seeing a lot of symptoms
That's taxpayer money going
of
there.
of what the teachers are being taught. So what can we do against the groups that are teaching the teachers?
Well, I love the unions. Someone asked about the unions. A lot of this is coordinated by the unions. In Oakland, for example, the unions themselves had teaching sessions on how to teach Palestine. And they gave their teachers this material, which, I mean, I'm kind of used to this, but this was like really beyond the pale, telling third graders to draw Zionists taking money to harm Palestinian children. LAUSD, yeah, I'm always told by the Federation that it's not so bad, but I think LAUSD is bad. So they give this material to the teachers, they train the teachers, and the district actually wrote to the teachers and said, you can't teach this stuff. They taught it. They went on the news and said, yep, we taught it. So we have to find a way to work at the union level. That's really hard to do. And most of the labor lawyers I've talked to have said, well, you got to sue the district. Well, suing district by district isn't really going to do the trick, especially when you've got the unions with as much power as they have and as much money as they have. We're working on this question. I can't talk too much about it because we have litigation kind of in the works that we're still developing. We're working with a group of lawyers from a big law firm I used to work with, and we're hoping that we can at least find an inroad to do something directly against the union, but it's not easy.
Thanks, Rachel. You keep saying we.
The Brandeis Center.
Right, and you remind me of what happens a lot in medicine and drugs. Everybody's working in their own silo. I was wondering if that's happening here. Is there any coordination amongst all the groups? Are there regular meetings, constant communication, so there's some central focus?
Yes.
Nationwide, if not
We're
Southern
working on
California.
exactly that. And
Okay.
we have a meeting every other Monday with a bunch of Jewish organizations, mostly in California, but not exclusively. ADL, Stand With Us, Lawfare, Deborah Project, a few others. And we do try, and Jack, we do try to get together and talk about what each of us is doing and try to find ways to address, you know, a common problem in the same fashion. And that's one of the things we're doing. We're trying to develop that, trying to be more of a clearinghouse so that we can have some coordination and some control, and we don't have rogue groups going and bringing suits that are going to make trouble for all of us. It's not perfect, you know, you can't tell another group, well, you can't bring that lawsuit, but we can try to persuade them that it would be better to do something a little different. And we do have funding that now that will allow us to do that more effectively, whereas we can screen something. If another group wants funding, the funders will show us what it is they want to do, and we can help screen it. Yes. Yes. We also work. colleges. There is a difference in that public schools are bound by the First Amendment, but private schools are also usually have their own rules that enshrine First Amendment type protection. So really the issues are not that different. And we've gone after, at the OCR level, many, many, many universities. We also have a lawsuit against UC Berkeley. We have a couple lawsuits in the works I can't talk about. We have a big one against Harvard, and that was settled recently. And maybe some of you heard about that. Okay, well, to give you a little bit of background, we started the case before October 7th. We started it because we had 3 graduate students who were Israelis come to us. Again, word of mouth, they came to us, they said, we have been treated horribly at the Harvard Kennedy School. And they told us about it, and they were right. And we pressured the school to do an investigation, and the investigator came back and said, yep, you've broken all of Harvard's rules about anti-discrimination and bias and harassment. And the dean promised he would do X, Y, and Z, and he never did it. Nothing ever happened. So these 3 Israelis they were badly treated by a particular professor. And they didn't want him fired. They just wanted the school to acknowledge that it had an anti-Semitism problem that was widespread. They said until we got to Boston, we'd never experienced anti-Semitism like this. So these are 3 former IDF soldiers, very mature people, but they wanted this to go public, and they wanted Harvard to apologize. As we started working on the case, October 7th happened, and everyone knows how bad things got at Harvard. So we expanded our suit to cover things that were happening to other grad students and to undergraduates, including one who was physically assaulted. And there was already a Harvard lawsuit brought by another group, so we were all before the same judge. The judge denied our motion to dismiss, which was, if you're a lawyer, you know that's a real coup when you get past the motion to dismiss, because then you can do discovery, and maybe, the defendant thinks, oh gosh, what are they going to find in discovery, and how much is the trial going to cost me? And Harvard has a lot of money, but they don't really need, I think they don't really need to go through all of that. And they were eager to settle. And our particular clients had particular desires. So we did negotiate with them, and I think the biggest thing we got out of that is that Harvard now recognizes the IRA definition and applies it in dealing with disciplinary matters. The IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And that's the one that says that if you demonize Israel, if you delegitimize Israel, if you treat it to a double standard, those kinds of things constitute anti-Semitism. Not that they're punishable, but they constitute anti-Semitism. We know when something is anti-black racism. I mean, it's easy to spot. It's not so easy to spot when it's against Jews. So you have to, if they say, well, they're just talking about Israel, that's politics, political opinion is protected. We hear this all the time. But it's not political opinion. It's not saying Netanyahu is a lousy ruler. It's the state of Israel should not exist. All of the Israelis should be swept into the sea. It's this kind of language that we have finally managed to convince them is anti-Semitic, and that they have to use that understanding, which they have not to date, use that understanding when they're dealing with disciplinary matters. So we did get this settlement. There's many more parts to it. Some of them are confidential, some not. Of course, Harvard isn't carrying through perfectly, so I have sources who call me and say, okay, well, this student, they're not listening, So then we can go back to Harvard and say, we have this student in the Graduate School of Education. Why is this happening? And we can, only by continuing to monitor, can we make sure that the settlement agreement is enforced. But that's true with any contract, with any settlement. You've always got to keep an eye on things to make sure that the enforcement is actually happening. And of course, you can always sue them again. You promised this, you broke your contract, we're going to sue you again. That's what gives us a little bit of leverage over the school once it's settled.
You mentioned OCR. You might want to explain what OCR is.
Okay. So at the beginning, I started talking about the Office for Civil Rights of the Department of Education, which is as much of a mouthful as the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights and Law. So we call it OCR, Office for Civil Rights. I know. It's part of the Department of Education, which, as you know, the Department of Education may disappear, but I think the Office for Civil Rights is moving to the Department of Justice. So there's still an Office for Civil Rights, regardless what happens to the Department of Education.
So my first question was actually going to be specifically about what you were saying you can't speak on, which was about what the plan is with the teachers' unions, because to me, as a parent and a lawyer who was very much involved before with what was going on with LAUSD, I really felt the union is a linchpin. So if there's anything you could share about that, I would love to hear what it is. If you can't, you can't. The second question or comment/question I have is with respect to the ethnic studies and everything that went on in the background before that law was passed, I really feel like that is a Trojan horse. I know you say, oh, you know, I don't have an issue with ethnic studies, and theoretically, okay, I don't either, but I think...
But what it has turned out to be is
what
awful.
it not only turned out, that was the intention, that was the entire debate before it went into law, was that it was, they knew very specifically what they were trying to do so that they can get this, you know, both sides, pro-Palestine, whatever.
Not both sides.
You know, what was it, under like Asian American studies, like it was a Trojan horse. And so knowing that, what is the plan, so to speak? So those are the two questions I have.
I don't know if anyone's interested in the history of ethnic studies. This is the first thing I started learning about at the Brandeis Center. This has been in the works since the 60s. The legislators have been pushed by certain groups to have an ethnic studies requirement. And the ethnic studies requirement is supposed to teach California students about the different ethnicities that make up the state and what the ethnicities have brought to the state and what kinds of harm they've suffered over the years. Fine, all well and good. But, as you say, they started out by drafting a model curriculum in the 2018, and it was full of anti-Semitic content. So there was a hue and cry, and the governor said, no, we're not going to sign this one. They went through the whole practice again. Still awful. They finally came up with a model curriculum that isn't that bad. But here's the catch. No one has to use it. So each school district can come up with its own ethnic studies curricula. And the people that drafted the first two went into business as Liberated Ethnic Studies Consortium, and there's a whole bunch of groups like this, and they sell their curricula to the school. Now, the law that established ethnic studies has guardrails, if you will. It says you can't bring in anything that we took out of those first model curricula. And it says you can't have direct or indirect bias against any group. The trouble is, these model curricula are like 600-700 pages long, very hard to get hold of them, very hard to show what was taken out. We did that work, and so we have a chart. And so we use that chart to say, here it is, not supposed to be there. And that would be the next. We'd like to bring a lawsuit that addresses the content of these courses. Well, that's the problem. I don't want to go after 1,200 districts. So we're considering a lawsuit against the state. I won't say anything more about it, but that's what we've been working on for over a year now. And, you know, we've initiated that by trying to talk to the state actors, and, you know, that's gone as you can imagine. So, yeah. Because the state of California, and this is true in Massachusetts too, in some states, the state itself is ultimately on the hook. They're where the buck stops. The state of California, the Attorney General, the Department of Education, they're responsible for what's going on in the schools. The California Constitution states that they can't pass it off to the districts. It's on them. So, and you've seen groups like Public Counsel, perhaps, they've sued the state based on other kinds of school issues. more appealing to state government than ours, perhaps. But we are prepared to go there, and you'll all hear about it as soon as we do it. The complaint's being written.
So you talked about in the classroom in K-12 and that teachers don't really have free speech in the classroom. What about in club settings?
What? I'm sorry,
in
what?
clubs, in the clubs that meet at lunchtime that are sponsored by teachers that aren't curriculum-based but are student-based. My son has had issues with that at his school, at his K-12 high school, LAUSD, and I'm just curious about things that surround that.
If someone is excluded from a club based on their Jewish identity, the content.
No, the content, specifically a club at his school that talks about the fascist government in Israel and compares it to the Holocaust.
Well, that's harder to go after because students have much more protected speech than teachers.
No, the teachers
Mm-hmm.
are.
Oh, the teachers are teaching the kids?
They're doing it in a way that doesn't. I don't. It's because it's not during classroom time. For instance, what happened was
It's
there was
still
a teacher wrote up
subject to-
an advertisement that was put out to the school, but the teacher wrote it and they had a student read it. The teacher is the one that wrote it and handed it to a student. So because the student read it, I sent a letter to the principal and superintendent and kind of got brushed off. And I'm kind of curious about if there's anything else I can do about that.
Call me. Call the Brandeis Center, and we'd love to talk to you about it and see what we can do. Because, again, it's the same free speech question. Even if it's in a club, it's still school stuff. So they can't do it. The district could stop them. The district won't stop them. And this is why we're trying to bring it to the state level.
Rachel, this has been great. Thank you so much so far. So just you had briefly mentioned the Department of Education. There may be a changing of the guard, and it might not be in existence in the future. I'm curious whether or not from your expert opinion, would it be better, worse, or the same not to have it in the future? How's that going to affect this overarching, problems that we're having right now with it in existence?
Well, if they move it to the Department of Justice, in theory, that could be a good thing because ultimately it would be the Department of Justice that decides whether to take away federal funding. Department of Education can't do that. The Department of Education can refer a case to the Department of Justice and say, look into this, but they never, ever have. Ever. So with the current administration and its obvious interest in school funding, it's possible, depending on who runs what, that moving to the Department of Justice could be more effective. But, it'll just have to play out, and we'll have to see, and of course, we're looking at it very closely.
Rachel, is it possible to identify allies that are in Congress, both state and federal across the country, put together a working group, and then also leverage those working groups and politicians, or elect new politicians that are perhaps more enlightened to these issues, and then use that to file lawsuits concurrently with legislative action that defunds federal money from coming to the states? And separately, is it possible to work with the Office of Management and Budget to also stop funding from coming into the states for violations of particular legislative initiatives?
Okay, we're a 501c3, which means we can't do lobbying. We're thinking about reorganizing as a 501c4, which can, but that said, we work with a lot of Jewish groups under the heading of the Conference of Presidents, which includes all the major, includes all the major Jewish groups. And it also includes like QFI, the Christian United group. And we do talk to people who are working on that level. So that's, yeah. Mm-hmm. That would be really interesting, yeah.
So the hour is late, relatively speaking, and I wanted to just make sure that we have an opportunity to wrap up in two ways. So Rachel, I have two questions for you. One is, as we walk out of here today, after being informed by you over the last hour, what are the 2 or 3 things that you want us to take with from how we might be able to participate and help in the work that you're doing at the Brandeis Center, number one. And number two, how do you get your funding? And what are the ways in which we might be able to support the important work that you and the Brandeis Center are doing on behalf of all of us?
I'll take the second question. We are privately funded. We get no government funding. We have some large funders, and we have a lot of smaller funders. And if you go to our website, www.brandeiscenter.com, I'm sure you will see the big donate button on every page. So we certainly welcome donations of all kinds, and that's how we operate. Your first question was the takeaway. It's really important to understand how badly understood the idea of Jewish peoplehood is. And that is the kind of message that you need to give your principals, your universities, your administrators. They need to understand that you're not talking about political opinion, because that's where their mind goes. You're talking about Israel, that's political opinion, it's off limits. No, it's not off limits. You're talking about Jewish identity. You're talking about the Jewish, strongest possible connection to the land of Israel. Now, I know that there are some very vocal Jewish speakers out there saying that Judaism and Zionism have nothing to do with one another. Remember that they are in the minority. They're a very small minority. They're very loud, but they're a minority. But people hear them and think that they're speaking for the Jewish community. They're not. You need to be very careful not to fall into the trap of thinking of this as political opinion. It's not. It's a question of identity. And to the extent that you can bring that message when you're talking to other people, when you're talking to teachers, principals, administrators, that's the kind of language you need to be using, because that's when they start to understand what's going on, and they may start to understand what their liabilities are. So it's one of the things that we train people. We talk to parents and students, like we talk to them for hours, and they tell me, oh, these terrible things are going on in my kid's classroom. They've got Hamas flags and pictures of the Jewish star with a fist through it, and this and this and this. And I say, okay, you're going to complain, and this is what you need to complain about. And this is how you need to phrase it. It's your Jewish identity. And that's something that people need educating about. And even if they don't want to hear it, eventually, when they get a letter from the Brandeis Center or Stand With Us or someone else that says you're discriminating on the basis of identity, there'll be a little click.
In fact, for all of us sitting here, if you want to have a deeper understanding of what Rachel just said in terms of how Israel and Jewish identity work, there is a brilliant young gentleman out of Harvard. His name is Noah Feldman. I'm sure many of you have heard of him or read about him. He wrote a book not too long ago called, I think it's To Be a Jew. And in it, he very expertly clarifies how Israel has become the primary way in which Jews identify themselves in the 21st century. Whether you are a Zionist or an anti-Zionist, you're still using Israel as the primary means by which we today identify ourselves as Jews. It's a very important book and an excellently written book to help make the case that Rachel is arguing for right now. And it's not an easy book to read, but it's not a difficult book to read, but I definitely recommend it.
I'd also recommend books by Gil Troy. He came out with one recently it's very powerful and helps you to frame your own message. Because we all know this. It's like obvious. It's obvious. So why don't they get it? because they've used the state of Israel now is the Jew that we all must hate, you know? And so anyone that supports Israel is a focus of that hatred.
And if you had one more message for us as we wrap up.
What's that? The unions. I know, the unions. We're working on it. Believe me, it is not easy. But if any of you have experiences with the unions, call me. We want to talk to you. We need not just legal theory, we need fact. We need to know what's happening on the ground. We need to get your input, and we are determined to turn this into a lawsuit. Yes. How do I do that best?
So here's what we'll do. We will put it on, where's Seth? Where's Seth? Wherever Seth is. Hi, Seth. How should we do this? How can we will put something in our e-newsletter that will have the information of Rachel's. Do you want your email?
Yep.
Okay, so we will bother Rachel
Bother me.
by putting her email into the e-newsletter and the website for the Brandeis Law Center. Yeah, Leslie?
The phone lines, I will give them.
Right, and the two phone lines.
Rabbi
She will
Kamas.
give that to me, to Seth, and we will put it into our newsletter so that you can have it and share it with other people. And I just want to, once again, thank all of you for being here, but more importantly, thank Rachel Lerman, not just for the discussion that she had with us today, but the really important work that she and the Brandeis Center are doing to fight this scourge, as I said, of anti-Semitism. And we all have to fight it. None of us can sit and rest on our laurels thinking that this is a battle that other people must fight. It is a battle that we have to fight for ourselves.
Oh, I think I said at the beginning, we're not affiliated with Brandeis University or the Kentucky Law School. It also has the Brandeis name. We're just standalone 501c3 Brandeis Center with has an office in LA. So we hope to be able to
And
focus
do you ever look
more.
for volunteers?
For volunteers,
Retired attorneys who may have something on their...
we keep a list of potential volunteers. If you go to info@brandeiscenter.com, you can enter your information, and we'll put that in there too. What we're looking for more often as we bring these large lawsuits is a law firm. And we're having pretty good luck, although we can also pay law firms if we need to, because we aren't really set out to do discovery and motions practice and all the stuff that happens when you bring a lawsuit. Maybe someday, but not right now. So if any of you are affiliated with a law firm that wants to help us, please let me know.
Thank you very, very much. Thanks to all of you, and let's fight this fight and win as long as it takes. Have a good afternoon, everybody.